Peace TV reporters have been active at the UN headquarters since 2010, the age of former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. They are often invited to gather pictures and news about high-level meetings and events at the UN headquarters. We usually report live on the scene the events of dozens of countries, including the US, France, the UK, Israel, Germany, Russia, Egypt, Kuwait, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and Morocco, and the EU at the UN headquarters and their residences in New York. Our news reports have, in part, kept the international community up to date with the work of different governments so that people everywhere will know the great efforts and contributions of the UN to world peace, international affairs, and multilateralism.
Today's program is the Korea Society's 8th annual Korean War Armistice Day commemoration. Armistice Day offers a special opportunity to express gratitude for those who served in the Korean War to defend democracy and the people of South Korea. The Korean War is often referred to as the Forgotten War, but even those who forget the sacrifices made by thousands and thousands of American, South Korean, and UN troops cannot overlook the outcome of that sacrifice. Preservation of human dignity and the sparks of a thriving democracy and the economic and cultural powerhouse that is now the Republic of Korea. That's why the Korea Society is dedicated to remembering and honoring Korean War veterans. And we're fortunate we have Korean War veterans with us today. We usually hold our Armistice Day ceremony at the historic Korean War Veterans Memorial in Battery Park, which is one of the first, I think it's the first Korean War memorial in the US. The commission was established in 1987. But as things have turned out, the entire park is under construction, and so access to the memorial is blocked. For today's ceremony, we have Korean War veterans from New York and New Jersey gathered here at the Korea Society for special remarks, performance of taps by Staff Sergeant Judith Gaunt, who came down from West Point, and an engaging panel discussion that focuses on that time in history, 1953, and reflects on the sacrifices and lessons learned from the Korean War and Armistice Day signing. Before turning the podium over to Consul General Kim Whan for some remarks, I want to thank the Korea Foundation and our American and Korean corporate sponsors for making this program possible.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your coming. So actually, this is my pleasure to be with you at this very meaningful moment. The war is not over yet. It's merely in a state of suspension. Just 20 miles north of Seoul, thousands of North Korean long-range artillery and missiles are aimed at South Korea. That's the reality. Despite the unfinished state of war and the constant threats from the north, South Korea has achieved miraculous prosperity over the past 70 years based on the Republic of Korea US Alliance. It has not only achieved remarkable economic development that surprises the world, but has also become a cultural powerhouse with soft power that captivates people globally. I would like to take this opportunity to express on behalf of the Korean government my deepest gratitude for the sacrifices of the Korean War veterans from America and the support of the United States, which made this proud Republic of Korea possible. They always remained armed and prepared for enemy invasion. This is because the only thing that they can trust is not a peace treaty, but their own military strength. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kinney. And let's have Judith get started. Judith. Bios of the panelists with us today. Their extensive experience can be found on the Korea Society website. Dr. David Fields, to the right, earned his PhD in history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, specializing in U.S.-Korea relations. He is the author of Foreign Friends, Syngman Rhee, American Exceptionalism, and the Division of Korea, and the editor of the Diary of Syngman Rhee, 1904-1934, published by the National Museum of Korean Contemporary History. Major Rachel Kim is an instructor of economics at the Department of Social Sciences at the U.S. Military Academy. Her research focuses on economic growth and development, economic and financial statecraft, industrial policy, and counter-threat finance. And Salvatore Scarlato is Korean War Veterans Area Commander. He joined the Korean War Veterans Central Long Island chapter in September 1989. He began as a member, then was voted as a director, event chairman, first vice president, and today is the president. He has been the president of this chapter at the Korean War Veterans Association, Department of New York, from 2009 to the present time. Moreover, of course, Sal, a good friend of the Korea Society, we could not do this event without him. So we're really glad that he could come again in person. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps in Korea from 1952 to 1953. So we'll do 3 rounds, so hopefully we can keep everything short, and then we'll have opportunity to have questions from the audience. The first round will focus on the war, the Armistice Agreement. The second round will focus on the Alliance Treaty and the immediate economic and political consequences. And the third round will focus on current military, economic, and political factors affecting the alliance and its future prospects.
It's very heartbreaking. When I first went to Korea, I hated it. I hated it with a passion because I didn't realize what war can do to a human body. And when I went down into the landing barge, it didn't hit me right away until I hit the wall. And the first bullet that hit my helmet knocked my helmet off. I was just turned 19, and it was horrifying. I cried, I prayed. I think I prayed to every religion that was on the face of the earth.
So, if you know Korean's history, the Korean Peninsula's history, this is, as you know, as throughout history, not the peninsula itself, not north or south, it's always consistently been the nexus of geopolitical tension between great powers, whether it's China or Japan, or even internally, right? Civil wars going back to 3 kingdoms in the dynasty era. And so all of that inhibits a government to mobilize the full factors of production to recognize its economic security, or economic potential for that matter. And even under Japanese colonial rule, right, that was an extractive institution, all the factors of production were mobilized, but for the Japanese economy. And so in 1945, after 35 years of Japanese colonial rule, the conditions were not great. Right? Agricultural, industrial base were diminished. And so they were in this identity of rebuilding. Right? I think that's the crux of the Korean identity. But also at the same time, after World War II, the Soviet Union controlled the north, the US controlled the south. And so you also had a very divergent governance structure as well as economies.
Which is he releases 28,000 North Korean POWs into South Korea after the negotiations at Panmunjom had decided that they would be turned over to the personnel of neutral nations to ascertain whether they wanted to be repatriated or not. He just completely short-circuits that process by releasing them to South Korea, having them disappear, hoping that the communist side will get so angry that they will walk away from the negotiations, which they do for about a month. They eventually do come back. So why was Rhee so hostile to these armistice negotiations? I think it's really important to understand that Lee Syngman did not believe that the ROK only ruling one half of the Korean Peninsula was a viable state. He thought as long as Korea was divided into 2 separate states, it could not be truly independent, it would be weakened, and that sooner or later it would be either incorporated into a Soviet empire or, and this is hard for us to believe today, a re-emergent Japanese empire. Syngman Rhee had very little faith that the United States would be able to successfully pacify and control Japan.
The Korean Peninsula, South Korea, was completely devastated by the war. 138,000 South Korean soldiers died in the war, if I got that number right. I don't know how many civilians died, 1 million, maybe more, 2 million. South Korea, North Korea. How did South Korea keep going after the war? Was it, what could they do on their own, or who provided the initial aid to South Korea? Did it come from, which governments stepped up and provided the aid to South Korea?
Sorry, it's a very hard transition, but I just want to say thank you, Sal, to all the veterans here in the audience, but just across, anyone who's contributed to that, because it's truly their efforts and their sacrifice and what they have to go through, which now veterans now can experience the benefits and the policy changes because of.
Sal, it's so important you mentioned the people after the actual hostilities ended, because at a lot of these think tanks functions, often in a self-flagellating manner, we think, where did we go wrong with North Korea? But where did we go right with South Korea? That's the real story. So thank you. Can we have another round of applause for all these gentlemen? Major Kim, you're so right, because after the Korean War, most people bet on North Korea to succeed versus the South, because it was more industrial. Japan had industrialized the North as a bridge to Manchuria. So most ethnic Koreans in Japan, despite being from what was the South, chose North Korean passports over South Korea because they thought the North was going to succeed. Dr. Fields, for as little as you've done, my question is actually for you. So much of ethno-nationalist left South Korean popular culture, movies, their English titles like Taxi Driver or Default, tend to be anti-conservative or anti-right. Has there been any re-reckoning, especially in the Yoon-suk era, of Syngman Rhee's role in Korean independence in South Korea? Has Yoon-suk himself talked about Syngman Rhee, or is that such a sensitive issue that nobody wants to talk about it? Is he persona non grata in South Korea? Where does he stand in the average South Korean's view today? Thank you very much, and thank you again for a great event.
Oh, he's certainly not. It's an issue that's very much being worked out right now. He has his supporters and he has his detractors. And what sort of commemoration does he deserve, if any at all, is under active consideration. But I wouldn't say he's persona non grata whatsoever. I don't know that Yoon-suk has made any specific statements about using my Consul General Kim might know much better than I do, but I know that people in his staff were talking about the film Kundu Chancheng and encouraging people to go see it. And so I think the rumor was that he approved of that film. I don't know if he ever said anything officially or not, but
I'm just I guess a sympathizer, of the cause of the Korean Society. Thank you both for your service and your comments today. I guess my question, unfortunately, is also for the professor. I'm just curious, when you talk about Syngman Rhee and his hesitancy to come to the armistice table, I'm curious, very briefly, what the factors were that would have driven North Korea to the armistice table. What made them willing to, super pause rather than keep pushing?
As succinctly as possible, what's the main lesson?
Jonathan Corrado,
What's the main lesson that we should learn from the Korean War and apply it today? And I think we got one more question after it as well.
So this is a question to everyone on the panel.
Yeah, please do.
What's the biggest lesson from the Korean War and that you could apply today?
What we could apply today? Well, as we see today, the strongest and the most longest alliance in the world is between Korea and the United States. And I think the unity of our two countries should show the world that that's what we should have. Unity and the experience of the Korean War. And I believe wholeheartedly, if we take the high echelon would ever look at the situation of the Korean War, how it was fought, and how it was won, and how it stand out to be. And I think we should learn a big lesson in that.
Yeah, I guess the biggest lesson is that it's not over. And that, once again, history can repeat itself, and we have to learn from it. And now we're in an era of great nuclear competition of China that entered the Korean War. How is that going to affect and impact our geopolitical strategy in Indo-Pacific? That's what keeps me up at night. What is the role that Korea has to play in this next conflict? For example, I took some cadets to the museum in Chukungli, the monument to the Battle of Chukungli, and learned that the PRC sends their military officers to study that conflict because they had lost that particular battle in the Korean War. So the biggest lesson for me is that when I look across my formations, my soldiers, my cadets, is that we have to understand the nuances of our society now, that conflict is not over, and we have to always prepare, train, and be ready for that.
And from the historian.
Well, I guess what's kept me up many nights thinking about this history is, what does it look like if the United States never suggested the division of Korea in the first place in August of 1945? And I can tell you that Syngman Rhee really wished that never would have happened. That he believed that Korea had a better chance of independence if it was united, and he would have gone on leading the Korean independence movement against communism, but he wouldn't have had an ally between him and the Soviet Union. It complicated things immensely on the Korean Peninsula. And then also the United States undertook what was a massive and very complicated occupation with no planning for it whatsoever. And so the American occupation of Korea from 45 to 48 was really a disaster at almost every single level. It leads to unprecedented levels of political violence, which we forget about because they're less in the Korean War, but it was an incredibly chaotic and violent time. And there's an alternate universe out there where Northeast Asia is more stable today, and where millions of people do not die in the war because the United States doesn't suggest to do that. Now there's also an alternate universe out there where maybe the Korean Peninsula today looks like North Korea, only bigger. So as a historian, I don't know which one. You know, I don't know what the outcome would have been, but I think it makes me very sympathetic for policymakers, actually, that they have to make very, very big decisions on a moment's notice. And even when they think that they're doing the right thing, you know, the idea is to get boots on the ground to make sure that we can ensure that Korea re-emerges from Japanese colonialism as an independent nation. If we have boots on the ground, we can keep it from slipping into the Soviet orbit. But the cost of that policy over the next 10, or over the next 8 years at least, are just so staggeringly high that one has to contemplate what the alternatives might be.
Well, if we could go through these counterfactuals, it's fascinating. But my big takeaway is that we're better off having an alliance that has stability provides stability in the area and ensures peace and prosperity, and increasingly economically and industrially. We're all becoming very dependent on each other. So this is, we can talk about the what ifs and all that, but we're in a strong position today.
Can I say one thing about the alliance? I feel like the alliance really comes into its own when South Korea democratizes. And the alliance is so much better today because South Korean society and government and American society and government are more on the same page than they were ever during the Pak period. You know, so remember the Korea Gate scandal in the 1970s. I mean, there's a lot of struggles in the alliance because the governments are just not compatible and the societies are a bit incompatible. And I think the more South Korea democratizes, the more they have this vibrant democracy, the closer that this alliance has become.
Jonathan,
Yeah, one more.
okay.
Hi,
One more question.
Margo Exgram, and I work at the Center for Korean Legal Studies.
Oh, John, I didn't recognize you.
That's okay. This question is maybe for
John's at the Columbia University at the
Center for Korean Legal Studies at the law school. So my question, I think, is really directed toward either Major Kim or Dr. Fields. And as I think it was Dr. Fields, as you were talking, I was thinking, thanks, John. Thank you. I was just thinking to myself about the miracle on the Whan, and that was obviously decades coming. So I wondered if either of you could talk a little bit about that as compared to West Germany immediately after the Second World War into the early part of that second half of the 20th century. What was it just a matter of the United States prioritizing West Germany security-wise? Was there a racial dimension there? I mean, what was really the difference, do you think?
Not too familiar too much with West Germany, but I think there was a very unique recipe with South Korea's rapid economic development from a homogeneous cultural standpoint, the unity and the reconstruction efforts, as well as very precise policy making. As you said, there are trade-offs, but understanding those trade-offs for an outcome that you necessarily can't predict at that time. And so, question two, maybe the uniqueness of the miracle one, is that also the question, or?
Really just why the difference in investment in rebuilding West Germany versus South Korea at that time, since we were facing, communist threats from both governments.
Yeah, I think it was also, for Europe, the Marshall Plan, primarily for humanitarian aid, but in South Korea, it was number one to reinvest those the humanitarian capital of foreign aid into infrastructure projects, because that was fundamentally the capital that will now enable economic growth. So that's one, it's a reinvestment into capital and infrastructure. And second was building their own domestic base. So instead of having FDIs or foreign direct investments for multinational corporations, which may not be entirely sustainable for domestic growth, they ensured that those FDIs in terms of capital built a robust domestic base. And from there, they were not so subject to volatile supply chains or from, corporations with different objectives. I think that was key to the difference in terms of the infrastructure evolution between the two regions.
Maybe I will just add that I think Syngman Rhee's land reform was an absolutely crucial prerequisite that needed to happen for Korean development. It was a necessary condition, but it was not a sufficient condition. And actually for most of his administration, he is a terrible economic manager. And one of the things that holds the Republic of Korea back is he refuses to normalize relations with Japan, which means that the ROK is dependent on aid from the United States. They're surrounded by communists in Japan, and they won't trade with Japan. And when Park Chung-hee comes to power, he is the one that takes the very, very unpopular step to normalize relations with Japan. That and the Vietnam War, which turns out to be a massive stimulus to the ROK economy, I think goes a long way to explaining the Korean development that will come quite a bit later, but it's those strategic investments made after Rhee that I think make the biggest difference.
Well, that's a good setup to our next program.
Okay.
But today I think we're done, and so thank you all for joining us. And I think we have sandwiches, right? That we'll offer.
Yeah, so please hang out with us, get a chance to talk to the veterans and our expert speakers. Right in the kitchen to the left of the stage, we've got some sandwiches set out, so please hang out and have some lunch with us. And we got cheesecake, because cheesecake is the American way. So thanks everybody for coming. Let's give our panelists one more round.
About my computer, but then people think I'm a joke.